Welcome back to another episode of Conscious Caregiving with L&L. I am your co-host, Lance A. Slatton. As always, I am joined by my esteemed colleague and friend, Lori La Bey. Welcome, Lori. How are you today?
I am doing wonderful. I always enjoy doing our shows. So, yeah, it's going to be a great week this week.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. It's always great to see you. I wanted to take a moment and, really discuss the importance of, memory cafes. I know that's one of the things closest and nearest and dearest to your heart. So why don't you start off by explaining to our viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with exactly what memory cafes are, what they are?
Well, memory cafes are kind of categorized as a support group, and personally, I don't like it categorized that way, but it's in caregiving one of the things that we do. To me, it's a gathering of friends. It's so much deeper than just a support group that you waltz into and waltz out of. And the friendships develop so deeply, and it's for not just the caregiver, because that's who we've always taken care of before, but for the person living with dementia too. And they can come as, a couple or as friends or, a son and a parent, whatever it might be. But it's for consistent people who are supporting someone that they love with dementia to get together with other peers that understand what's going on. Because one of the biggest problems with dementia that we hear all the time is how lonely this journey is, how misunderstood it is, and why don't people help? Why do they fall away? What happened to our relationships? And it's very, very isolating. So this gives them a safe space where they don't have to, be on their tippy toes and pray that everything goes just perfect, because no one in that room's life is going perfect. And everyone's just looking for a good life and a good connection, and they're all learning patience, and they're all learning to be grateful for what they still have. And they work together, on that journey and support one another with what they tried, what worked, what didn't work. And it's a beautiful thing as a facilitator to be part of.
Absolutely. I want to, emphasize this too. These aren't new, gimmicky things that just came about in the last year or two. Memory cafes have been around for quite some time, and you're one of the, founding, principles of memory cafes. When did they first start, and what was really the motivator behind starting them? Because, they're so impactful. They are very resourceful. And like you said, these aren't just like your typical, caregiver support groups where you come in and come when you can and leave. And these are also developing very deep and meaningful relationships. How did this all come about?
Well, it started over in the Netherlands in 1997, and originally they were called Alzheimer's cafes. And then they started going to other countries like Belgium and France and Sweden and Indonesia and England. But then over time, people realized that the name itself was holding people back from coming. And not, there's a lot of different types of dementias, not just Alzheimer's. That's really evolved too during this time frame, because originally when people were introduced to memory loss, they were all told it was Alzheimer's disease. That's really all the doctors were giving us. And, as we were talking offline, Lance, there's many different types, from frontal temporal lobe, vascular, Lewy body. I mean, the list goes on. And I still haven't heard of an exact number, because some people have multiple dementias, like my mom, we found out, did. Upon autopsy, she had Lewy body, she had Parkinson's, and she had Alzheimer's disease. So the name itself changed and went to Memory Cafe. I heard about it actually through a man by the name of Norms McNamara, who lives over in the UK, and he's been living with the disease quite some time. And he was telling me how valuable these gatherings were, how much fun it was, the freedom, the independence, the dignity that they had. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to learn more. We don't have anything like that. How did this get started? And he's like, I'm going to hook you up with the people who run these. And, over in the UK, they have like prime ministers and budgets, and we don't have any of that, over here in the US. But and so they worked like with the Baptist churches, and they claimed the basement area, on certain days, and just had that space, and really worked as a community. And the doctors and nurses, the practitioners knew about them, and they were advising people, towards those. And it was just kind of a natural support for people. And so in talking with norms, I talked with his peeps, and they changed their wording. They took their S's out and put our Z's back in, and they wanted to know what titles do we use, and stuff. And that was all fine. But then it was trying to get it off the ground here. And there was a lot of pushback, like, you can't have them together. And I'm like, well, where do you think they are the rest of the day? Because most of the people that attend, not all, but most of them are married couples. And so they're spending their days together. And I just thought, why can't we teach them to live gracefully together? But I think sometimes with support groups, some people go just to complain. And I think that was the fear that, that would not be healthy for the person with dementia, which it wouldn't be. But what happens in a memory cafe is those difficult things are talked about, but the person with dementia is included, and they have ideas on how to fix things, or how they'd like to be approached, or why they get silent, or why they get mad. And a lot of times it's because of the way we're approaching things. And so they're just so powerful. So it took me quite a while to find someone who wanted to align with this. There's always a pushback, and then there's an ownership. Well, then then we'll trademark it. Don't you dare. This was given as a gift, Karma's going to bite you one, and make it a hard one, because it's like, this was a gift. This is not about ownership. And the other thing that I love about them is they're fluid and they're flexible. So it's not a clinical model that has to be done in ABC order by, XYZ running them. And to me, that's a really beautiful thing, because I think sometimes when we get so in the box with our criteria of how something has to be run, we smother the creativity, and we stop asking the people we're serving, is this even working for you? Because we're so proud of ourselves that we're following the rules type deal. And so, and I'll give you an example. I ended up working with ACR Homes and Arthur's Senior Care. And in 2011 is when, we started our first one here in October in the U.S. And we believe it was one of the first. Wisconsin was, and I were really close together. And we didn't really have a budget. We had like a sponsorship through a company, which wasn't huge. Wisconsin went more after, my understanding, more after grants and things, and they did a huge splash over there, which was wonderful, and have a clinic in the whole 9 yards. But ours was just, let's gather people together. But then it was like, how do you get the word out? And back then, there were still free calendars in local papers, that you could put advertising in, and you could run around to coffee shops and pin something up, and get a hold of senior centers and communities. And a lot of that has changed and not accessible. A lot of the small town papers are gone, and the calendars, everything, you have to pay for, in so many different ways. And then with the staff shortages nowadays too, people, even though they might believe in it, it's a low priority for them to promote, because they have to get their job done, and probably somebody else's too, because everyone's short-staffed. So it took us a while to get everything off the ground. And then we got, I live in the Twin Cities in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area, and I'm on the St. Paul side. We actually had press from Minneapolis do a story on us. Lance, we all of a sudden had people driving an hour, 45 minutes to an hour one way to get to us. And, it just, we had like, I don't know, it was 10, 12 new couples. I mean, immediately. It was just boom. And, we kept kind of growing and getting the word out. And we did a lot, through social media and kind of trying to expand it that way. But it was really the personal word of mouth from people telling their doctors and telling their friends and running into other people in these situations that created the membership. And then we expanded to 3 different groups that all ran at the same time out of the same coffee shop, and were all sponsored by Arthur's. But then we also saw a couple of needs change during that time. We ran ours from like 1 to 3 because we thought it's after lunch, it's before dinner, not a lot of traffic, it's still light outside. I mean, we tried to take in all the accessibility things as well. But then we also had one because we had heard from families that they wanted one after work where a child could bring their parents. And what we found is nobody showed up. I mean, really, we had 1 or 2 people show, and they weren't consistent because most of them are sandwich generation and they had to go to a sports game, and it gets complicated quick. So our group then said, instead of doing the afternoon one once a month, could we do it twice a month and then just don't do the evening one? So that's what we did. So we ended up meeting twice a month, which really allowed us to build those friendships faster. I think every week is too much, and I think once a month isn't quite enough to kind of get that grip, for people to get familiar with one another. And, it was one of the biggest honors I've ever had. The stories that were told, the sharing, the unconditional love and support for one another was unbelievable. They would come early and have lunch together, and then we'd meet for 2 hours, and then they'd still stay around and chat sometimes after that. Yeah, but they would go out to dinner, they'd go for walks, go to movies. They would sometimes reach out to one another at 2 or 3 in the morning because they couldn't sleep, and so they would email one another and then maybe, hop on the phone. But they really, like you said, they felt this was their new family, because so many actual family members and friends feel so uncomfortable with the disease. Or you run into that situation where if you're the primary caregiver, you're telling people what life is like 24/7, and they come over for a 15, 30-minute visit, go, they're crazy. They're fine, and then that really builds that friction up. And yet there's always an opinion, though they're not there to pick up the pieces and stuff. So people really find support and deep connections in these. Our group, we also started, we were going to kind of follow the UK format where they did an educational program and chat and have a treat. And then our group said, can we just chat? Can you tell us where the educational things are happening in our community? Because, a lot of senior communities and home health care have educational programs. Can you just tell us where those are? Because we need stuff to do the rest of the month too. But instead of duplicating that, so we started doing that, and then we allowed them to have more time to gather as friends. And we never really had an agenda. So from a facilitator standpoint, it's much easier. You don't really have to coordinate and prepare and do all of that, and you let the group lead the conversation. Just like when you get together with your friends or family. You don't walk in with an agenda and go, okay, this is what we're covering today, And so it was very organic, very comfortable. And you, as a facilitator, there are still some out there that feel it has to be a nurse or it has to be a social worker that runs them. I would get a lot of people that would call and say, we're interested in starting one up. How do we do this? And as I was, talking to them about strategizing and, what do they have, strategically, some people have money, some people have people, some people have, a place to do it or someone to help them advertise. And you have to learn all of those things. But what was really common is a lot of times it was kind of, I'll say the gopher of the group that gathers all the information for the team. And they would just sigh and go, oh, I really wish I could be part of this. And I'm like, well, you already are. You've reached out. And they're like, well, no, really, facilitate and be part of the group. And I said, well, why can't you? Oh, well, I don't have a degree. What do I know? I said, you don't really need to know a whole lot other than to be respectful, be dignified, be able to pass the wand so everybody has a chance to talk, and then be able to say, I don't know the answer to that, you know? And then, when a question comes in, you throw it back to the group because a lot of people in the group have experienced that, and that empowers them like, oh, I guess I do know more than I thought I knew. Because everyone goes to like a support group thinking they don't know anything, but they have learned a lot even before they got to the support group.
I was going to say, Lori, for me personally, having professional side experience and personal side, I think the personal side will be much more valuable because when you're trying to help others, you can understand maybe not identically, but you can understand to a great degree what they're actually going through and walking through versus if you just learned everything through a textbook, and I think that's one of the powerful aspects of the memory cafes or, your support groups is you're there to learn from others who have gone through it and they can relate to what you're going through. So, if you go into, a professional setting and you're explaining, my dad's wandering, won't go to bed, unless they've actually gone through it, they can only relate so far and they can give you some recommendations. But if you say it to someone who went through it with a parent or a spouse, I think you're going to get much more understanding and support because they can relate directly to what that situation is that you're experiencing.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think the other difference that comes into play with who answers is the family is storytelling because it is an actual experience. The professional, a lot of times, is very task oriented, which, in my opinion, is a huge problem in how we care because most of us don't care how a task is done, or I should say, I said that wrong. Most of us don't care about the task being done. We care about how it is done. Are we included in it? And so often, and it's very common, I did it too, I'm sure everyone's gone through this, where it's just easier to do it yourself instead of having them do it because maybe they're a little slower or they don't do it quite as right as you would like it to be. But we're stripping them of dignity, we're stripping them of joy, we're stripping them of feeling purposeful, and those things really matter. And when we strip people of that, that's when other symptoms pop up. You get the isolation, you get the frustration, you get the anger, you get the depression. We're adding to those things, and that makes a really big difference. And when these groups talk, they talk about what works, but they talk about what didn't work. But then they'll say, but I tried it again a couple weeks later, and it did work. And so they really teach people about building a toolkit, and you never really know what's going to happen. And so you have to, kind of create patience. You have to create that flexibility and spontaneity. You have to shift from perfection to progress, and you have to look at failure in a different light, that it's a lesson learned. And how else can we, apply something? And especially with a disease like dementia, things are always progressing, and that's really important for us to totally understand, because what used to be effective in one moment might not be anymore. And I'll give an example of that. I'm caring for a loved one right now whose husband passed away. And she always wanted us to be honest with her, and we would say, that he passed away. And she's, oh, thank you. She's like, my memory's just not where it is. I don't know how I don't remember that. But she was very appreciative, very grateful. And now she has gotten to the point where the disease has progressed and her memory, 10, 15 seconds max. And then she's starting to get more frustrated instead of thankful and reclaiming that her life has changed. She can't process that anymore. And so as a care partner, it is hard. And I mean, and I'm a professional in the industry and I'm finding it hard to switch gears and go along with, well, he'll be, yes, he's at the store and he'll be coming home, because I got on this mode and it worked so well. And I know that's what she wanted, but that's not what she needs now. And so it's really letting that go and going with the flow and saying those fiblets that a lot of times family and friends aren't comfortable. I've never lied to them. I'm not going to start now. But it's really about learning to live in that comfort zone and what does that take, And so these, people in Memory Cafe, they talk about timing and sleep and dietary needs and incontinence and exercise and just everyday things of getting the chores done or doing the finances or going to an event, outside the house or preparing for one, and how much things have changed and how have they coped, with all of that. And again, it makes them not feel so alone in the journey.
We're having this great conversation about memory cafes, but for those that are interested, maybe they're just starting out on this journey, Lori, or maybe they're middle of the way through it, wherever they're at in that journey, and they're interested and want to start, exploring and attending memory cafes. Where would you like them to go? And they're not just in person; you can also attend virtually. Is that correct?
Correct. There are both. And so, you can always go to Alzheimer's Speaks to our free educational resources, and then click on the Memory Cafe. That'll give you a chance to watch some videos of the meaning behind them from people who have participated in them to those that facilitate them and how different they all are. And then, I'm not doing memory cafes right now because we closed our one June 10th. But you can Google Memory Cafe Directory, which is part of the Memory Cafe Alliance, which is under the Dementia Friendly America organization. So what I have found easiest is if you just Google Memory Cafe Directory, it will bring you right to the Dementia Friendly America page under the Memory Cafe Alliance, because sometimes when you go to a larger site, it's harder to find what it is you're looking for. But that's what I would do. Or again, you could go to Dementia Friendly, or actually it's dfamerica.org for Dementia Friendly America, and then go on the top bar, they have something that says, one of the tabs is Memory Cafe Alliance, and with that drop down, you can get to the Memory Cafe itself. And again, on Alzheimer's Speaks, I have a direct link for people to be able to access that. One of the hardest things is just pushing the buttons and taking that step to check it out. And a cafe or a support group, I always encourage people, just because you visited one doesn't mean that's going to make or break you. It's like anything that has to do with people. You have to find the right fit and the right population. And I really haven't found, I'm glad to say, I really haven't found that to be an issue for most people. They're just thrilled. And many go to more than one cafe because they like the support. They love the friendships that they develop. And, I just hope they continue to grow.
Yeah. Real quick too, I know you you're the co-founder of Dementia Map, and I just want to give a little attention to that because I think it's one of the most amazing resources on the internet, period. And I'm sure people can also find Memory Cafe information on there as well. I would encourage people to visit Dementia Map because not only for the memory cafes, but for the, just the endless amount of resources that are there for families walking this journey that you've cultivated and curated for people to have access to. I just think it's a tremendous site.
Well, thank you. Yeah, they can search for memory cafes. We originally weren't trying to compete, with the memory cafe directory originally, and wanted to just kind of keep it simple on the site, so they'll find a link to the memory cafe directory. But again, we can easily have people list their memory cafes there. We've had a calling for people to want to do that, and so we're opening the door, not in a competition thing because they're all interconnected, but just in a service heart, to try to make it simple for people.
Wonderful. Well, Lori La Bey, co-host of Conscious Caregiving with LNL, founder of Alzheimer Speaks, and co-founder of Dementia Map, and a dear friend. Thank you as always, Lori. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Well, thank you, and thanks for letting me share a little bit about memory cafes.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us again here at Conscious Caregiving with LNL, where we're tackling the tough conversations. We look forward to seeing you again here next month.